reasons I believe Trudeau is juicing the immigration numbers. First of all, I think they believe that mass immigration will turn into mass liberal votes in a few years.
Yes,
and there seems to be evidence for that, or at least there has been in the past. But without mass immigration, Canada would have been in a recession for some time now. What I mean by that is, on a per capita basis, Canadians are falling behind, where our incomes are falling per person. So you personally are poorer now than you were a year ago. How do you mask that if the GDP for the entire country is shrinking? Well, you bring in millions of people, and although that doesn't fix the per capita poverty, it gooses the big number because the GDP, it's gone up a couple of points. Yeah, because you're literally bringing in 5% of the population of this country. How could it not grow? So it's masking the poverty. Here's a clip where Mark Miller basically says, he admits it. He says, were it not for mass immigration, we'd have to admit we're in a recession.
The Bank of Canada has said it. The International Monetary Fund has said it. Immigration writ large has been in part responsible for preventing us from going into a recession, has been important for the net growth in the gross domestic product. Again, this has been important, and it's been important to the growth of the country. But I think it's safe to admit that we have allowed certain aspects of this to get overheated, and probably for too long. Well,
there you have it. He's admitting that it's basically putting up makeup on a very ugly face of the economy.
Yeah, it is a fake growth because it's, and I've heard economists argue this, and even economists that I like who say, oh, yes, but without immigration, we'd be in a recession. Yeah, I can guarantee you, though, that the average Canadian has felt like they've been in a recession now for about a year and a half or 2 years. And only statistically does immigration mask the reality of the economy. The inflation is too high. The carbon tax sucks too much money out of your pocket. It's harder for your kids to find a job. Housing prices keep going up. And lots of those have nothing to do with immigration, but many of them also are exacerbated by immigration. So you bring in all of these immigrants and they suddenly start producing slightly more GDP so that it doesn't look like GDP is shrinking. It's growing very, very small. I mean, there was one quarter this year where it grew by 0.2%. I mean, that's pathetic. So it's growing small. But it's growing. And so you can say, oh, well, yes, of course, the country's growing. And that's because we're bringing in all these immigrants. But if you look at the cost of living for the average Canadian and the opportunities that they see and the ability for them to buy a home, even to buy a 480 square foot condo tower apartment in Toronto is evaporating because there's so much pressure on the housing market. And that is largely, although not entirely, but largely from immigration. And it's ridiculous for people to say immigration has kept us from being in a recession. Statistically, yes. I mean, but it's like wallpapering over a giant hole in your house and hoping that that's going to keep the cold air out in the wintertime. It's not.
You know, there are some major institutions in this country that benefit from that gross GDP. And even if we're getting poorer individually, like if you're a bank, pretty much everyone in Canada needs a bank account. And in fact, if you only have a little bit of money, you actually proportionally pay more in fees. Pretty much everyone in Canada needs a cell phone. Everyone needs a landlord. So there are some powerful lobbies, developers of condos and apartments. So there are some people that the raw numbers is golden to them. But that's very different than the average or ordinary person. I want to move on to the second clip from Mark Miller, because this is the one you were alluding to where he's sort of admitting that maybe they've gone a little too far. Listen to these astonishing numbers. He talks about the number of visa applicants from India alone is 50,000 per month. Do the math on that. That's 600,000 people a year from India alone who want to come here. Here, listen to the exact stats as he says it. Take a look.
Those measures that we have taken internally to be a little more restrictive on who gets visas, looking at countries where we are seeing people exploiting the visa system, that is to say that those that are claiming for asylum are not legitimate asylum claimants, is a challenge to the system, particularly given the volume of people that are looking to come to Canada. Again, as I said in French, it is a privilege to come to Canada. It is not a right. If you compare the numbers of people that have come in, for example, in one country where we have had some of those challenges from India, we have seen those visas jump down from around 50,000 in January to less than 10,000 in August. Again, these are preliminary numbers, but it is an indicative sign that the measures that we've taken over the summer after discussions with my provincial colleagues are working. There's more work to do. And again, there are a number of measures that we need to take to make sure that when asylum seekers come to this country, they get due process, but that there is no abuse in the system. And it is incumbent on the federal government to act when it controls the levers, particularly at the border.
So he's sort of grudgingly admitting that it was out of control, but this isn't news to him. He's known this the whole time. He's been in favor of this the whole time. In fact, until about 5 minutes ago, if you criticize this, you were a racist.
Yeah. And I mean, I am amazed that he named the country that was responsible for sending the most of these asylum seeker, tourist, temporary visa, because that alone would have been verboten in the Liberal caucus until a month ago. They've now started to say, well, we're going to cap the number of foreign students. We're going to cap the number of temporary foreign workers. The thing about the temporary foreign workers that drives me up the wall is that when Jason Kenney was the immigration minister and Stephen Harper was the prime minister, they made provision to allow 70,000 temporary foreign workers into Canada, largely because there was this job deficit. We had too few workers, particularly in oil and gas, and they needed bodies. So they let in 70,000. Well, the unions and the NDP and the Toronto Star, and oh my goodness, they're ruining the country, blah, 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 blah. The Liberals are letting in 700,000 or more a year, and only just now has anybody thought to criticize them over this. The hypocrisy, if in legacy media, we wonder sometimes why we're losing credibility. And I think that's a particularly good reason why we examine one side of the issue vigorously and ignore the flaws in the other side. And one of the reasons I got into this business 30 some years ago was it was fun to be able to sit in the middle and pick apart both sides.
You know, Danielle Smith showed a lot of courage saying what she said in the political media environment. She's already getting bashed online for it. Other premiers have shown that courage too. The premiers of Quebec has basically, I mean, about a month ago, he said, without temporary foreign workers, we would solve our housing problem immediately, which is, I think, statistically true or close to true. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Alberta, Quebec, that's 4 provinces, have spoken out boldly. And what's interesting to me is those are all provincial leaders who, again, don't have really constitutional authority. It's just through agreements that maybe they speak out. Whereas the federal Conservatives, in the form of Pierre Poilievre in particular, is still sort of timid. Previous Conservative leaders, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, basically said, whatever the Liberals say, we say it too. Please don't call us racist. Pierre Poilievre is slowly and carefully finding his feet. He's saying, well, we'll track it to home building and employment. But he's not, which, okay, that's a baby step. But he's not saying stop it. He's not saying stop the bogus stuff, stop the, like he's not calling out things in the same way that Danielle Smith did.
And until the end of the Harper era, through Chrétien, through Martin, so for however many years of liberalness that was, back through Mulroney, basically our immigration decisions were based on economic need.
Right. If
the country had an economic need for what you possessed, the skills you possessed, the entrepreneurial smarts that you had, the trade, whatever it was. We were happy to let you in because it was a win-win. We needed those skills. You wanted to come to Canada. But that connection with the economic side of things has gone out the window under the Liberals.
You know, it's true. And I'm glad Pierre Poilievre is slowly finding his courage. But I think he's so terrified of the traditional liberal media weapon against conservatives, you're racist, that I think that's the only reason holding him back.
And I think that weapon has been disarmed a bit. I think in some ways now, if the Toronto Star editorializes that you are a racist because you don't want to have 700,000 foreign students in the country. Yeah. A lot of people who are reading are going to say, I agree with that. I don't think you're racist. I just think that that's smart. For instance, on my own case, I was reluctant to go too hard on the subject of immigration until it became a mathematical issue. I am not against immigration. I'm not against immigrants from any particular area of the world. I don't have a lot of strong feelings about family reunification, for instance, as long as economically you're viable. But the math now just simply does not work. It just doesn't. And so I think we're getting to that realization among the population where, we understand now that 1.5 or 2 million new people a year is unsustainable. And I think it's really, really funny because, of course, the people who are the most adamant about maintaining these high numbers are the very people who think that, our current use of fossil fuels is unsustainable.
Hey, great point.
We're big on sustainability.
That's a great point.
But we're not big on sustainability when it comes to the population or the economy. There's so much inconsistency among progressives and the left in the country, whether they're media or politicians or advocates, that some days I just wake up and I wonder, am I bashing my head against the wall?
It's the news event of the year. Canada's most controversial premier sits down with Canada's most controversial journalist, and everything is on the table. Come watch Ezra Levant one-on-one with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith in front of a live studio audience in Calgary. Nothing's off limits. Nothing's held back. Questions that would make Justin Trudeau invoke martial law. Answers that will make Stephen Guilbeault pee his pants. You're not going to want to miss this one. But you have to be there in person at the Rebel News Live mega conference in Calgary on October the 5th. Tickets are limited, so drop everything and go to rebelnewslive.com right now. Special discounted prices for Patriots and special extra high prices if you're with the CBC. Go to rebelnewslive.com now.